Welcome to Millennials Meet Liberty, your source for searing hot libertarian takes on the world's weekly headlines. Here's your host, Colt Thompson.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 6th edition of Double ML Millennials Meet Liberty podcast with yours truly, Colt Thompson. Just wanted to take some time to devote today's episode to more of a topic, just an educational topic, just the vantage point or prism by which I view the entity that is known as government. So I'm not going to talk about a weekly or daily headline in this episode, but I believe I'm going to springboard into doing 2 episodes a week from this point forward. So I'm sure we're going to catch the latest incident, mishap, or other item in the news this week. So I'll be able to encapsulate what happens there. But right now, I just want to take this episode to devote it to purely education as it pertains to being a libertarian. So hear me out on this one, guys. So my whole episode right now is going to be devoted to the nature of government in the eyes of a libertarian. So most people don't know what a libertarian is or what a libertarian believes or what the philosophy principles for which the philosophy rests upon, which is perfectly fine because it's something you're not going to get from government schools or indoctrination camps that are public schools or, moreover, even private schools, because private schools usually extract their curriculum and model it towards public schools with their own little twist and maybe a couple additional courses that meets the needs of that school. Perhaps it's a Catholic school, so they sprinkle in some religiosity here or there, or whatever their mission is above and beyond just traditional public schooling. And homeschooling too. Most people who are homeschooling parents aren't completely well-versed in economics or political philosophy because, why would they be teaching that to children up towards the age of 18 anyway? So it doesn't make sense. So you're really not going to learn and understand what it means to be a libertarian and what it means to understand the true nature of government if you're coming up through the ranks in public school. And a lot of people fall victim, especially to worshiping government or worshiping the state, as us libertarians refer to it as, because maybe they're like the greatest student in their class. More often than not, I see that these really hardworking students are often ones who are not going to question or challenge authority. They're more robots chained to a desk, really fulfilling the desires of their parents in hopes that they get to college or what have you. So basically, they need to drink the Kool-Aid and every last drop of it and not deviate from that, as Tom Wood says, 3x5 index card of allowable opinion. So the really, really intelligent, hardworking student growing up is never going to really truly understand the nature of government being brought up in government schools or that of free market economics or just anything that libertarians really care about. They're not going to get it. And then as it pertains to these students who are not so good with the pen and paper, while they might be anarchists of sort because maybe they're misbehaving, causing trouble, or generally are not all that interested in school, they themselves are not going to be getting this education to the extent that, a libertarian parent might bestow upon their children. They're not going to get it. So there's limited resources for people from the jump, from early childhood, from as far as pre-K all the way up until 13th grade for some people, to learn about the true nature of government and libertarianism. So I think it's really, really important to, I'm not going to use the word unschool, but kind of shake out and desanitize, as they say, the educational curriculum you were force-fed throughout most of your life. Because you're not going to pick up on free market principles or libertarianism and the true nature of government through these entities. I have to emphasize that a ton here in the beginning of this podcast because it's that important. And it's just the quintessential mantra we've all been fed from public schools. Let's stand up early in the day and salute our flag and proceed into changing the world and making the world more perfect. Well, government foisting upon this narrative of what we need to do as a citizenry from our days as an early adolescent is nothing new. I mean, that's what governments have done all over the place, especially when they've been in charge of education. So let me focus more on what I want to talk about before I go on this diatribe of public school education, because obviously I have a bone to pick with that. And having many family members who have been employed in that industry says nothing about them and who they are. And anyone who's employed in government, whether it's federal, state, local, municipal, what have you, I have nothing personally against any of these people. In fact, some of them the best people I've ever met in my life. So to say that government in its own right, I guess I am not going to necessarily say right quickly what I think of government, but when I start extrapolating upon what I think about the true nature of government I am by no means implicating the people who work for government. The further you get up the ladder in government, though, and you have a little more control and can pull a few more levers, there quickly becomes, I think, some blood on your hands, so to speak. And if you're that out of touch with what you're doing on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly, annual, whatever, within the confines of government power, eventually your character does need to be called out. But as it pertains to the middle class teacher or the cop or the firefighter or the military man, whatever it is, whatever government agency that someone's working in, the EPA, the EEO, somewheres where I actually interned as a collegiate undergrad, any of these people, I totally have zero problem with them. So I just want to make that perfectly clear, because when you criticize the true nature of government and call it out for exactly what it is, people who hear this are automatically going to recoil and be very angry and upset and take it personal, because a lot of people's personal identities are tied up in what they do on any given day. And that makes sense, because most people spend more time at work than they do with their family. And to the extent that they're working, they want to at least pretend that they enjoy what they're doing and that what they're doing is making a difference, has an impact, and has an ultimate purpose. So I'm just going to come out and say that this is not criminalizing or indicting anyone who works for government when I call out what it actually means to be affiliated with the government or anything that they do to our citizenry, the government. I mean, I just do not want to implicate anybody. I just want to make that very, very clear, because I like to think I'm a good person and I don't make attacks or hurl attacks at people who do something they care about when it's behind the veil of government. So that being said, we're going to dive into this because I'm a libertarian, and libertarians really should care about these things. So defining what a libertarian is, I'm not going to do that right now into the full detail, but generally speaking, you need to be anti-state. So anti-state meaning anti the government. So what we recognize as libertarians is, while we have principles rooted in the non-aggression principle and private property rights and freedom of association, libertarians generally just make a lot of observations, empirical, historical, economic observations about how the world works. So when you make these observations and you have a few of these principles to go off of, you quickly realize how much of a behemoth and monstrosity that government truly is. So I'm going to make a few small points, and I'm going to lay out a few adjectives, verbs, nouns about government that are not so friendly. But I really want people to get this, because a lot of people grow up and they think, why I'm a Republican or why I'm a Democrat or I lean one of these ways on the political spectrum. But doggone it, as long as I'm in there or the person I want is in that government position, things, gosh darn it, they're just going to get better. They're going to get a lot better. And that's okay to have that mindset, because anyone who thinks they control their own destiny or their vote matters and they can put someone in a government position to fix things, whether it's a government agency or any type of department or political seat, well, yeah, that's the attitude you want. It's a can-do attitude. That's what we've all been force-fed growing up. We want to be reaping what we sow. And I get that. That's fine. But let's not, like 99% of people, because we're libertarians and we're in that 1%, the true 1%, not the 1% that people alienate and ostracize all the time and really want to tax the living fuck out of. But as these people who truly recognize that their positivity and silver lining mentality should not go with pulling the levers of government. We should stop treating the cancer as if spreading it makes it better. No, we need to whack the cancer completely. We need that cancer to go into remission. We need to shrink the size of the tumor. So what I mean by all this is very simple. Government is basically a band of thieves. As H.L. Mencken, the late great historian and economist, pointed out, an election is by and large an advanced auction on the sale of stolen goods. What we're getting at here is that government is coercive, government is forceful, government dictates are what sets the bounds of morality, even if it's not truly moral. So government in general always talks about their missions, but in reality, government is just an arbitrary body. Libertarians do not believe in the social contract. I'm going to put that thought on ice for a second. There's a funny meme going around in libertarian communities showing a fetus inside the womb on, I guess, potentially a sonogram or something that shows a fetus signing the social contract. And the meme is basically pointing out that there is no such thing as a social contract. Libertarians understand that, and that going forward, we don't necessarily need to abide by all these rules and regulations, but we know common sense tells us we'll be thrown in the slammer if we don't. So the idea that we're just getting these taxes withheld from our paychecks really sheds some light on this whole social contract thing, that none of us really volunteered to do any of this. I mean, these voting on behalf of people who are not even born yet, that doesn't really, sit right with me. It doesn't make sense. But putting that thought on ice for a second, libertarians really view government as they need to abide by the same morals and principles that humans have. And generally speaking, I mean, there's philosophies such as nihilism or all these just different philosophies, which is fine. But most normal humans, 99% of humans, understand the concepts of don't steal, don't lie, don't cheat, whatever, the very basic golden rule type commandment type things, because these are pretty much general lines that can be drawn in the sand for the human experience. I mean, these are things that we know are rooted in aggression, hence the non-aggression principle with libertarianism. And that's just something humans should not do. So what we do as a society is we excuse government for all of these things that they do that break the non-aggression principle and harm people by the millisecond. And I don't get that. So libertarians, we look government square in the eye. I'm speaking metaphorically, I guess. And we say, do not steal, do not cheat, do not squander resources, do not hurt people, do not take their property. And if you look around, we're on this giant plantation. The United States federal government taxes us just for basically living. And what I mean by that is you're paying your income, which is essentially the fruits of your labor. When it's all said and done, throughout the course of a year, you probably paid upwards of 50% of that money back into the government. And this wasn't voluntary. We all know that. The government's stealing this from you. And saying that taxation is theft really bugs a lot of people who work in government or people who believe in government. They'll shout out things like, well, what about the roads? And there's a lot of libertarian memes and t-shirts devoted to my roads. And then they'll say things like, well, I really like having a fire department. What would you do without your fire department? And all these things. And that's really heady stuff for a basic beginning libertarian. So I'm not going to dive into that right now. But things as simple as comparing arbitration and mediation, those private entities versus the judicial system we have, can kind of shed light on how government doesn't necessarily need to do all these things that people think they do. And I've probably mentioned that in a previous episode or two. But just looking at this nature of government, again, going back to this, we need to really call it out for what it is. If you're thinking about a business or a person or a family or any entity that's not considered part of the government, hell, even a true nonprofit, not one of these nonprofits carved out of a federal statute or something, but a true nonprofit, a break-even business in air quotes that really tries to move the ball forward by operating a break-even business just to give back in a philanthropic way. I mean, if you look at any of these entities, if they were hemorrhaging cash, if they were stealing money from people, if they were squandering money and going into insane amounts of debt, if they were killing people who they didn't even know overseas, all of these things you just think about, I mean, that shouldn't sit right with you. If they're monitoring, banning, and just overall micromanaging somebody's business like that was not theirs, or what the person's consuming or inhaling, you see where I'm going with this. I mean, between the income tax, the property taxes, the sales taxes, all of these different insurances that are mandated by the government in some capacity, from utility services that set arbitrary prices, it just makes you think, well, then government in general is just arbitrary. It's willy-nilly. The issue with government is that it's not set in stone what their purpose or mission is. And to the extent that it is in the United States, it's the Constitution. And every politician takes an oath to uphold and follow the Constitution. They are supposed to solemnly swear to do this. Well, it's been overridden from the onset of the earliest days of the document. So it's been completely bypassed, degraded, and overran. Oh, well. So when you're overrunning the Constitution, it becomes even more arbitrary as to what the purpose of this government is. And as government grows and becomes the unfettered octopus over everyone's life, really sticking its tentacles where they don't belong, LOL, then you see where the problem is. If you arbitrarily go into a relationship with someone and one day you say you're devoted to them and another day you say I'm going to cheat on them, how is that going to work? And we wonder why we're so dysfunctional in society with the federal government that we have, the regime here in the United States. So businesses, for example, in the private sector, just to juxtapose what's going on here with government, businesses in the private sector have a profit and loss margin they need to operate on. They have a motive to make profit. Earning profits promotes possibility. Profit promotes possibility. That's just how it goes. So anyone who's getting a service from a private company is voluntarily handing over their dollars, saying that they value the service more than the money they're bestowing upon that service, and vice versa. The service being given to the person is worth less to the person collecting that money who owns that business or works for that company. So there's a certain level of voluntary exchange. When the government seizes resources and steals people's money, first of all, it's not voluntary, as I've alluded to before, but then the services always suck and everybody bitches about them and everyone complains about them. They talk about the potholes in the road. They talk about how education costs too much. They talk about how medical care costs too much. They talk about how their taxes are too high. They talk about how everything fucking sucks. You hardly hear someone say, well, my house sucks or my car I purchased sucks. And when it does suck, they realize it's because they didn't earn enough money to purchase something that was better, or maybe they didn't maintain it properly. But that's not on anyone else but themselves. So when you localize the issues and people have to hit them head on, it removes that sense of arbitrariness. They create their own purpose where they need to figure it out. With government, it's unending arbitrariness. A business needs to deliver the lowest cost and the best product at that cost. And by best, it's really subjective. It's what their consumer demand is, what their market niche is, and that's fine. So, for example, when the United States has an issue, perhaps like a federal natural disaster, something occurs, maybe a tsunami hits one of the coastlines here in the mainland, and all of this money needs to be diverted there. Well, if you look, the money typically is printed or stolen or squandered or taxed, whatever. I don't know how that money will just get to them. However it's issued from the government. But you damn well know that for every dollar the government steals from the taxpayer, they usually piss 90% down the drain for overhead. And then maybe 10 cents on the dollar gets to that relief. Whereas we know the inverse happens in the private sector because they're forced to consume resources more intelligently and efficiently to channel those revenues downstream, meet that consumer demand. So what I mean by that is just fleshing that out is 10 cents might go for overhead in that dollar, whereas 90% of that dollar, the 90 cents, might hit the issue head on. So with private charity and philanthropic efforts, which really come out of the wealthier societies in the world because of capitalism, they have the wiggle room to do that and give back, you notice that they're a hell of a lot more effective. And people want to say, well, no, capitalists come in there and they exploit people in these tough situations. Well, I hate to break it to them. When the price of water increases exponentially in an area where water is needed, bottled water is needed because of a natural disaster, that's sending a price signal to the market to have the private sector furiously rally these resources back into that area. The price is what dictates the supply booming in there. So just in this situation here, obviously the demand is super high and there's a shortfall of supply in terms of bottled water, and that price mechanism and signal sends in that bottled water. Whereas the government might arbitrarily decide 2 years after a disaster that they're going to send some pork barrel relief in there. And by the time the relief gets there, the money was already squandered on something else. Everything they need is not necessarily needed at that point anymore, and it goes to waste and they pitch it in the dumpster. So the private sector can figure out things like building a combustible engine over 100 years ago to manufacturing all of these cars that people drive every day that increasingly have more commonplace luxuries. Everybody pretty much has electronic windows and air conditioning in their cars. Hell, even leather interior sometimes as part of the baseline packages. And they're figuring all these things out in the private sector, and things are continuing to get better. You can only improve so much, I guess, but there's always room to make things better for the human experience. And The same thing with like TVs growing in size on average in the United States per household. So I think 30 years ago, the average TV size was roughly around 20 some odd inches, whereas now it's, 50 or 55, which is pretty funny to think about. This is talking about the average American's house too, not just rich people. So you then think about the simple things the government's tasked with doing, like doling out the mail at one point. Well, yeah, they were completely circumvented and smashed out of business and proven dysfunctional and wasteful by FedEx and Amazon. Bang, taken care of, done. We don't need that Pony Express anymore. And then when people bitch about the roads and the potholes, I've heard libertarians say this before. Is it really that difficult to lay a strip of tar from one spot to another? And I'm stealing that quote from Tom Woods, but is that really that difficult? If we can build this combustible engine and these wonderful, beautiful cars that are so effective and provide all these luxuries and amenities, and we can do this in the private sector and people are happy with the price, why is everyone so upset there's potholes everywhere and not understanding where their dollars go? And it's because government, again, is arbitrary. So they are arbitrary in their mission, which causes them to make decisions based on things they know nothing about. And every time they set a price for anything, it's always arbitrary and it's always high. There is no exchange on earth where a mediator comes in, slices part of that money, keeps it for themselves, and that deal couldn't have been is done cheaply if the two people are there just by themselves. Voluntary interaction doesn't take a third party skimming money off the top and making the decisions for these people. So government is arbitrary, it is coercion, it is immoral, it's thievery, and its counterpart is the private sector, free markets, private property. And I don't necessarily love the characterization of government as the public sector and business as the private sector. Strip those out of your mind for a second, and you can think of the government as the predatory sector and the private sector as the productive sector. And what I mean by that is voluntary exchange and capitalism have lifted billions and billions people out of poverty, as I've alluded to before in my podcasts. And while doing so, what ends up happening over time is these governments leech these resources off of this productive economy, thinking that they're going to do something better than the productive economy can do. So the predatory sector is just seeing some of the casualties of capitalism, in air quotes, which those casualties actually wouldn't even have been born or would have died had there not been capitalism. So they're not really casualties at all. But the people at the bottom rungs of the ladder who are missing out, in air quotes, they're going to be saved by the almighty government stealing resources, throwing them into a bureaucracy, and hoping to spit out a situation where these individuals can prosper in their eyes. So it should come as no surprise that the most successful, powerful capitalist nations oftentimes have the hardest, most aggressive people going against capitalism and going for the predatory sector because they see all of this carnage in their eyes, in air quotes. So people love to talk about poverty in the United States. Poverty in the United States has a different definition than poverty in other countries. So if you're in the United States and you're earning $30,000 a year, which is probably somewhere around what a lot of people earn, I'm not really sure what the percentage, but between 30 and 45 grand, there's millions of people in the US who earn that income on an individual basis. Maybe both households have people earning that income annually. You are literally living like a fucking rock star compared to somebody in any of these other foreign countries, these third world countries. So in the United States, and Bernie Sanders of the world are talking about poverty in the United States and how poverty is so awful and terrible. We've never been in this tough of a position before to take care of the poor. It's just a bunch of hogwash. I've spoken to homeless people in Portland, Oregon, because Portland's a stronghold for this counterculture of people living on the streets and having homeless neighborhoods. And they'll readily admit to you that there's a 3 free-course meal at pretty much every other block in that city that's arose out of private charity in that area. Hell, I think there's been a couple businesses that have popped up to predominantly serve some of these homeless people, thinking they're going to come back and lure some righteous people in there to donate for them or spend more money than they otherwise would because they're going to serving these homeless people. But just thinking about this, I really think people need to get a perspective and get a grip on what it means to live in America and what poverty really is, because these government programs essentially trap people in poverty. So there's a built-in incentive to not work if you know you're going to, get food stamps of a certain amount and medical care of a certain amount and your utilities of a certain amount and your Section 8 housing of a certain amount. If you know that you are, again, in air quotes, out of work or cannot find work or actively or passively looking for work, and all these programs exist, and then maybe you have another kid or maybe you have 5 kids, and all of a sudden these other entitlement programs are open up to you and these further subsidies come down the pike. Well, why would you ever think about working? Like, as a rational human, other than just pride and being a good person, why would you ever think about working if the economic incentive is don't work, you get all these things handed to you for free at the expense of the taxpayers back, and maybe someday when you feel like you want to maybe earn a little more money, you can. Because if there's a welfare program and if they're all total up, they are more money than the minimum wages or more money than any job you can find in the area, well, then what is the incentive of finding a shitty job when you can just stay on the dole and collect all these programs? It doesn't make any sense. It's economically irrational. Now, if you were just upset with the money the government was giving you for doing nothing, and you were upset with the incomes in the area, but you were really hell-bent on just earning more money to live a better life and a more fulfilling life, well, then, yeah, maybe you'll make that jump. But again, for most people, being comfortable is kind of like in their element, and they don't want to make that jump. We have millions of people on welfare in the United States because of these programs of entrapment. And I totally get the rationale and the logic behind that. If you grow up poor and you see your parents do that, well, why don't you just hop on that same bandwagon of living off the government? There's nothing wrong with that. Just fake an injury or say you can't find a job, even though you could definitely find a job, because there's so many jobs vacated or vacant in this country due to structural unemployment that, it's not very difficult. You maybe have to start off on an off shift, but most people can walk into a manufacturing facility in the United States and earn, I don't know, that whole fight for 15 thing. If you're in a poor area of the country, you could probably earn 12 or 13 bucks from the jump. And if you're in a very wealthy, prosperous, booming area of the country, you could probably start out at $16. So the whole minimum wage thing is really it's really irrelevant. It's funny when people talk about the fight for 15, it really doesn't mean anything. I mean, the market clearing wage is around that anyway. So the minimum wage doesn't really apply to people. And to the extent that it does, is temporary jobs and jobs people can move out of and jobs that are designed for people who want to work part-time. But again, above and beyond that, government just being arbitrary again. And I'm just all over the place a little bit, but I'm just thinking about just really, again, this poverty thing kind of resonates with me because I've heard other libertarians say this before. If you're in the United States, John D. Rockefeller and the Vanderbilts and all these wealthy people of back in the day would have been foaming at the mouth for the innovations that we have here, from the transportation, the air traffic transportation, from the experiments on the internet, the medical innovation. They would be like, oh my God, how much did you pay for this, kind sir? Looking through their monocles, thinking that you probably own 5 yourself, even though that's not really a thing people who are rich wear these days. But that'd be the point. I mean, you can make your 12 to 15 bucks an hour guaranteed in this country, and you can live with someone, and you can pay a rent of $500 a month or $700 a month, and you can have 2 cars, and you can have a TV, and you can make the conscious decision not to go into debt, and you can make the decision to work your way up in a company, and life can be pretty damn good. And really, the issues that we have in this country, again, are caused by government. You look at what's expensive. Healthcare, education, very, very, very expensive. You look at how your paycheck is obliterated by the siphoning off of Social Security and Medicare and various taxes. And you ask yourself, the only thing really working against you is the government and the money that they're extracting from your very pocket and the fruits of your labor. What's countering that is the innovation in the private sector. The cheap disbursements of goods flooded all over the place. Your phones, your TVs, your cars, your experiences, your flights, all of these things that really have less to do with government interference. So when the chips fall where they may, and the private sector resources are allocated very, very, very efficiently and effectively. And I could go a million different ways with this angle, but people should be very, very grateful for capitalism. It's a wonderful, amazing thing. It has allowed us to experience things like the game of golf, like video games, like relationships with people all over the world we otherwise never would have gotten a chance to meet. It has given us all these wonderful things. It is a byproduct of voluntary exchange and hard work. The mission of capitalism is truly to better the human experience. by seeking individual fulfillment and by being, you can say the word selfish. It's okay to be selfish because in this world, there's a certain level of negotiating and cooperating, and those who are not going to play nice are being too selfish, and they will not win in a capitalistic society. So the free market exacts punishments on people who do shady things. The government encourages people who do shady things to accumulate power, namely Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, all these corrupt, crooked people who have no principles. A crooked laughing because that's the Donald Trump word for Hillary, but who have no principles, who will steal your money, who will openly admit that they want to redistribute someone's money or pay off someone's loan with somebody else's money. If you don't think for a second and ask yourself where are these people's moral compasses, you really should start doing that. So in the theory of subsidiary of a libertarian, these decisions that are made at a more localized level are no big thing. They're not a big deal. The higher you go up the food chain, the more levers of the apparatus of government you have to make decisions, the more casualties there will be. The empire of the United States has slaughtered millions of people in the Middle East. It has hundreds of military installations across the globe. It is washing money directly down the drain. It is imprisoning people who should not be imprisoned. It is violating people's civil liberties and rights and privacy every single day. And I can go on and on and on and on. And if you look at the government as well, what they have done, whether taxes have been bottomed out towards zero or up towards a tippy top of 97%, and again, these are graduated income taxes that are escalated, so maybe the 97% tax or the 95% tax only hit the 0.0001% of income earners. But to the extent that they've had these taxes, the progressive taxes, the escalated tax brackets, to the extent that they've had these, all of the tax receipts and revenue that have gone to the government, by and large, have only shaked out or equated to be about 20% of GDP year over year, regardless of where tax rates were. So that means there is indeed a point, and some people call it the Laffer curve, named after the famous economic historian and economist, or Laffer. But eventually, if you're going to tax someone too much, they're going to leave, or they're going to divest, or put their business, or put something else in another country. Whereas if you tax too little, people will stay there, and maybe there will be more businesses that offshoot that can be taxed, and your revenue ends up the same anyway. So there's always this constant fight for the money between the productive sector and the predatory sector. So it makes you think, why don't we just bottom out taxes altogether? Because, and really a consumption or a transactional tax is the way to go if you want to raise income through the government, which I'm not advocating for it all, but I guess it's a little bit less more criminal than just stealing from someone directly. And I'll explain that a little bit differently down the road. But again, just bottom out the taxes to nothing, because at the end of the day, these governments, they're going to find a way to spend and waste your money on little pet projects they have, or these really high in the sky ideals that they really want to project onto the public, that they want to sell to the public and then really not do, but maybe half-ass it, and we end up in a worse position than we would have been. But really, what these governments do is they can print money, the Federal Reserve, they can borrow money from foreign countries or banks. I'm not even exactly sure what they're doing these days. That's how sketchy and sleazy they are. Or they can tax. So if you just bottomed out the taxes, recognizing you're only going to get this certain chunk of revenue as it pertains to a percentage of GDP, well then, yeah, you can borrow, and we've done that a ton. And our treasury notes will come due at some point. They'll come due in waves in 5, 10, 20, 30 years. And that's a non-issue. And you can just use the third one that I mentioned, which is just printing money. And that's the most immoral of them all, because it has the insidious nature of devaluing our currency, where at one point in time, in today's basket of goods, maybe the $5 you used today at the store could have bought you a few more handfuls of groceries. And I can extrapolate that in further podcasts. But the printing of the money is really what gives way to the misdeeds of all of these people in this arbitrary, coercive, theft-ridden organization known as the government, this band of thieves. So we really need to strip away the Federal Reserve altogether and just have them stop firing up the printing press and have them stop being the sugar daddy for all of the prostitutes that is the federal government, and just really the degradation of our society as a whole. So I know I'm rambling, but I think just to make sure people understand this, people in government, by and large, are not good just because they say they have good ideas, whatever that means. People in government who want to tax you, who want to regulate you, who want to encroach on your civil liberties, who want to do any of these things need to look in the mirror and realize, I myself would never want this tax. I would never want this regulation. I would never want this encroachment on my civil liberties. And what I would truly want is freedom and liberty. Because I know when I have more of my resources, I am happier, I am more prosperous, and I know when my fellow peers have more of their money and more of their wealth, they are more prosperous as well. And when we are both more prosperous, we can trade amongst each other, create businesses, fuel free enterprise, and create wealth like no other and contribute to the human experience. So people who want to tax, who want to regulate, who want to create more bureaucracy and government programs, these are the people who are our enemies because they don't get it. They have not bothered to make known what true principles of morality are, like a libertarian would, or at least bothered to make an attempt to understand what the observations of the real historical economy are. So the true nature of government, work with me on this, people. They are corrupt. It is thievery. They are not transparent. They steal, they harm, they hurt civil liberties, and they are by and large not a good entity. And when you get involved in government for the right reasons, which in my eyes, the right reasons is a message of liberty and actions of liberty and scaling down this monstrosity of the government, when you get involved, that does not make you a bad person. You can be a good person doing those things, but you're doing a dance with the devil. And it is hard to do a dance with the devil and win because nobody has won doing a dance with the devil in the United States. It has not happened so far. It has only gotten progressively worse. The cancer, the octopus cancer continues to grow. And people need to wake up and realize this. The best thing we have going for us is freedom and free markets. And I'm going to pinpoint some of this stuff and some of the industries that people care about. But if they want to know why medical costs have risen drastically, why medical insurance has risen drastically, why the cost of education has risen drastically, why people are indentured servitude to the federal government, if they want to know all of these things, if they want to know why millions of people have died in many, many years of warfare overseas that has been on the offensive, it is because of government, the arbitrary, coercive, destructive, violent force and nature of government. Government, aka the predatory sector. We need to cut it down for what it's worth, hit it head on, and speak the truth and honesty as libertarians about this being. It is not the people therein, especially towards the bottom ranks, but as you escalate up in power, you need to grapple with the fact that what you're doing is probably immoral and you need to gut check yourself. And just because people are sheep and the vast majority of the people don't understand that does not make it right. Ron Paul said it right. If the people, and I'm paraphrasing, if we have a moral government, it's because our people were moral. And if we have an immoral government, it's because our people are immoral. And that's exactly what we have going on here in the United States. We have an electorate who is immoral because they failed to educate themselves and they decided to go and vote someone into this office and in these offices and put them in positions of power in these agencies and runaway bureaucracies. And the only thing you're going to get out of that is more government, more suffering, more devaluing of our currency, just an utter shit show. And it's really, really terrible. So what I believe in is free markets, capitalism, voluntary exchange, civil liberties, private property, truly respecting each other, treating everybody as an individual, treating everyone as if their life matters. That not putting the group association of a black person or the group association of a rich person above or beneath anybody else. We are all humans. Government will do everything they possibly can to tap into certain pockets, whatever pockets have the loudest voice or the most pull or say at that time, they will use as puppets, they will use as a tool to get in charge and then create all of these programs that, again, will drop these very same people into a situation of plight. And that's exactly what I feel like is happening at the border and people who've came here illegally. There's nothing wrong with that in my eyes per se. But using them as a bargaining chip politically, as Democrats do, will probably end up to hurt these people coming to the United States in more ways than one. I can surely count on that. So I really, really want to hammer this home. Government is evil, it is bad, it is corrupt, it is arbitrary, it is coercive. Does that mean people are bad who work for government? By and large, no. But like I said, there's an inclination for people towards the tippy top to have done some seedy things to have gotten there. And it's because they don't have morals. Their judgment is not clouded. It's just they don't care about their judgment because they're that immoral. And these people need to be met with force and fury. And by that, I mean education, of economics, of history, and doubling down on the creative spirit of entrepreneurship in this country. There are workarounds to everything that government fucks up. We live in a globalized economy where the internet is abundantly at our fingertips, and we need to combat the government every chance we get, because history has told us that there are dictators, that there are kings, that there are monarchs, that there are savage, ruthless leaders who will do everything they possibly can to exploit the public for their own personal gain and for that of their comrades in higher office, and who head up some of these departments or regulatory agencies. It's all a play for power and prestige. And we need to realize just because we don't live in a bad place as, I don't know, some of these African countries where kings and queens still exist, or where there's limited free markets and capitalism, just because we don't live there doesn't mean there can be an infringement upon our rights. Every day a red flag law is talked about, or every day a mandatory background check is talked about, or every day it's okay for the Patriot Act to spy on us through surveillance and know what's going on our phones and on our internet and our computer. Anytime these things happen, anytime the government devalues our currency that's sitting in the banks for us in our bank account because inflation is going up every year, they are hurting us. They are not helping us. People who help us are people we give our money to voluntarily, to feed us, to clothe us, to provide for us a good experience, to allow for us to interact and do the things that we truly want to do here in this country. And by we, I mean everybody as a whole. Because if you truly care about everybody as a whole, it is not government that you should care about. You should care about the private sector, the productive sector, and how to embolden and empower that, and to push us further into an era of enlightenment and understanding that the government, again, is not here to work for us. Let's smash this thing. Let's bust this thing open. Let's make sure that the creepy, disturbing, messed up people in charge of this thing understand exactly the power that they wield and how it needs to be diminished. People who are truly humble and want to get involved in government, who want to work for some of these programs, need to look at the budget, look at the balance sheet, notice how these things are broke, busted, and hurting people, and figure out a way to fix it. And oftentimes fixing it means getting rid of these things altogether. So I implore my listeners, remember, government's not working for you. There's a certain amount of freedom and peace of mind and mental health to be had knowing that you can control your own destiny, even if this behemoth of a government is going to take over 50% of your income, because you can fight back, you can do things, you can be entrepreneurial, you can have these good times, these wonderful experiences in lieu of what government is doing. That is what being a positive silver lining person is all about, seizing the day and making the most out of the situation we're in. So recognize the true meaning of government, the predatory sector, and what all of these awful things that coincide with it really mean. Because when it clicks with you, you'll be able to laugh at these people peddling these narratives and these ideas and these policies and programs. You can laugh right in their face and say, you are a liar, you are wrong, you are pushing things that are immoral. And I myself am better than that because I'm grounded in liberty, individual freedom, respect for others, and ultimately the golden rule. So that being said, that is the end of episode 6. Hopefully you guys like that ranting and raving. I think you might. And I'm really proud to call you guys my listeners. So onward and upward on to episode 7. Thank you very much.